that you'll get to meet some of them in person too. So what I'll be doing right now is just giving you a little bit of a sense of place of this project within the larger program that it's a part of. The majority of my work with the Center for Environmental Ethics and Law is to advance what's called the Biosphere Ethics Initiative. And it's an international soft law program that works with local communities around the world to listen, number one, listen, and to see, to have them, to create a space where they can tell us the problems that they're having, to identify the harms, to also give the vision of what they want to be seeing that isn't happening, and then the solutions that they've tried and have failed, the solutions that they've tried and have worked, to share those stories with each other, like local community. And then my job is to then amplify it on the global stage, to get global attention, whether it's media, global governance, policy, whatever I can do with the network and the people that are part of my network and people. So I'll give a little bit of background into the work, how we got to today, and then into some of the other local communities as well. Understanding, every local community owns its work. My purpose is to listen and think, okay, you have amazing ideas. How can I realize them with the tools that I have? That's really my purpose, and to honor the truth of the story that's happening or the harms that are happening. So as I had said, the overarching umbrella project is the Biosphere Ethics Initiative, and we use what's called a rooted cosmopolitan approach, which I'll talk about, and then the Rollato methodology, which is actually from a Portuguese word, to relate. It's storytelling. Because one of the things we wanted was to not be hyper-Anglo, hyper-Western, hyper-English with the communities that we work with. So that's where we came up with the Rollato methodology. And then I'll go into the people and partners of Gary Rise as they now stand. Now this is a living project, and we're at an informational session, so we're at the beginning of this project. So this is where we're reaching out to partners that we find that we have kindred spirits, kindred missions, kindred values, to see how we can move forward together. And with that we use Ubuntu, which is an ethical and legal principle from Southern Africa. And it's all about connectedness and relations. It's kind of small, I do apologize. And I hate to read from the text, but because it's small, I'll go through some of it, just so in case you can't see it. But the International Soft Law Program highlights ethics in action. The way that we interpret ethics, it's right and wrong behavior and when responsibility attaches. So it's the foundation of justice, the rule of law, because it's accountability. We understand there are unjust laws, absolutely. In fact, that's what a lot of our attention goes to, are laws on the books but no political will behind them, to enforce them, to realize them. We share the stories of harm, healing, and hope from these communities around the world. And then we develop arguments, and this is why we're saying we're using the language of law here. Human rights, rights of nature, community rights. This is what encompasses this work and gives some of the muscle behind it. And then we translate those arguments to advance actual policy change. And it's cross-disciplinary. We have educators, park managers, scientists, mothers, fathers, teachers, parents. We have literally everyone at our meetings. Theologians, religious ministers, rabbis, everyone at our meetings. And that's the only way that we believe we can get solutions that are meaningful. And absolutely not do I ever go to a meeting with all lawyers. Like, I know it's going to fail. In fact, if I'm at a meeting with all lawyers. So rooted cosmopolitanism is a worldview and also a methodology for ethical action. It recognizes that each of us has our own individual particular stories. Like, I am Katie. I'm from Michigan City. I'm also from Indiana. I'm also from this place right on Lake Michigan. Also from this nation. Also, so it's like, it recognizes your local place and the value of that local place to the global community. Like, one of the things that when you work in the international world, a lot of people will talk about, we want universality and commonality, which is good and important. But a lot of times that becomes anonymous. Like you get these anonymous, beautiful language, but without much meaning and heart behind it. And that's where we get rooted cosmopolitanism. I recognize you, Marcy, as your place here, but also the value of this place to the global world. So when Cassandra was talking about Gary, she's like, Gary has a place here in Gary, but it's important for the world. And when we work with local communities, it's actually really amazing to see them have that same perspective. You'll work with a small indigenous community in Jeju, South Korea, and they'll say, what happens here is important for the world. World peace begins here. How our government is treating us as an indigenous community has importance for the world. And so to see local communities understand that importance and power is meaningful. So it's taken from the Portuguese word Rollato, to relate, to inform, a story, a narrative, but really it's just about creating this space. And also understanding that because we work with harmed communities, because we work with vulnerable communities, they don't always get that space. And sometimes that's intentionally done. Like the government doesn't really want certain people to be getting together and talking about the problems in that government. But it's also could be because of the challenges in their everyday life, whether it's finding childcare, again, food on the table, paying bills. Not everyone has this mental capacity or addiction to care about, talks about democracy and engagement. But I'll tell you, that's what the powers and control don't want to happen. They want the apathy. They don't want the conversations where we highlight, you're violating our human rights by not providing a space for democratic engagement. They want us to be tired. And I know it's hard, especially for people that are harmed, to continue to find strength. And that's where Cassandra came up with the phoenix as a symbol of this whole project. So we look at who are our allies, who or what is working against the common good of the community, what they care about, and why is that not being realized. What motivates them? How do they address the challenges of corruption? That's throughout all of the local communities. The main commonalities I've seen outside of water, the role of water is life, is the role of the government. It's a hostile government, an absent government, an impotent government, an absent government. And the whole purpose of government is to create a society that allows us to live our lives and have the common good. The role of the government is to protect and create a structure for justice and rule of law and order in the good sense of order. And too often that's just not happening. And also the other commonality I've seen is women. Most of all of the local community projects are women-led. So to address the challenges of corruption, economic and political poverty, war and violence, discrimination, disconnection, addictions, loss. One of the women we'll be hearing from, Christiane in Brazil, her entire body of work is on decolonialism. So it's principles of colonialism seen today. Principles of colonialism is based in violence or threats of violence, racism, sexism, discrimination, predation, so powerful industries, powerful governments, powerful politicians coming in and silencing or manipulating. And we see that. We see that today. We see colonialism today. In Brazil, that's what she's focusing on and working on. And so these are the projects that we've had to date. And I'll carry us through the Gary Rise Rollato. So there's the Chicago Wilderness Rollato, which was one of our very first meetings when I was with actually another organization, an NGO based out of Chicago. And we were just thinking, like, how can we connect humans and nature and economy and development and sustainability and all this together, but for the common good, for the future of life. How do we dispel myths like jobs versus environment? That's a myth. Then we did the South African National Parks Rollato, Indiana Dunes Rollato, where we came back to my home and I met Cassandra. And that's where we need to go even more narrow. We need to go even more particular to Gary. the Rollato of Jordan, the Rio State, Rollato in Brazil, Dongdong Village in South Korea. Here we are with Gary Rise. And then I'm also working right now with a women-led project in the MENA region, which is the Middle East, Northern African region in Jordan, on ecofeminism. So it's women-led, you know, in a dominantly Muslim country. So it's really just novel, is what she's doing. And based in ethics. So they celebrate the good of our humanity. It's why we had the Phoenix Rising Award. We understand with the harms, it's easy to focus sometimes on the harms, that we have to take the moments to celebrate the good, like we did today with Philip. And continue that, the individuals that are fighting amidst the struggles. The procedure of the Rollato is very organic. It usually starts with someone approaching us about a harm, honestly. So it usually starts with a negative, some harm that they can't overcome on their own, and they're just seeking help. And they don't yet know how to identify or put into the right language exactly what kind of help they need, but they just need help. They're harmed in some way. And so that's where I would meet them with the local leaders or whoever approaches me or our organization, and just try to listen about the harms that are happening and what they need. Like, what are you looking for as the end goal of this work together? Or if it's an evolving project or a living project, there is no end goal. You know, it's a relationship that will continue to build and evolve. It's real, it's local, non-local, and diverse. At every meeting it's all local led, local leaders, local community members, and then we bring in international experts as well as people from the previous local meetings. And that's why Cassandra had joined us from Brazil. So it's a continuation of that local story from Indiana Dunes region. She came down to Brazil to tell them about the Indiana Dunes region, and then hear the stories, like the exact same stories of harm they were experiencing that she is experiencing in Gary. And it's eye-opening to have solidarity and connection with people halfway across the world that you've never met. It's also democratic, absolutely at its core, transparent, voice is heard. It gives voice to the voiceless, the vulnerable. This is who we focus on, people who have been harmed, usually triggered by loss or a threat of loss to culture, identity, to way of life, to work, to education. You know, all of our funding has been pulled out of our public schools. Our state government's completely hostile. We have a city that's preying on us, trying to buy up our property. There's some external threat a lot of times. And they help heal. This is a goal. This is what people have said, but it's always a goal that we seek, is that it's some, even if it's the storytelling, the sharing, finding other people in other places, that we hope that there's some healing aspect to just someone listening and showing people they're not alone. It demands courage, because like I said, one of the most common problems across the board is powerful governments, harmful governments, hostile governments. So to take people to stand up and to name names, like we don't want just beautiful language or, oh, you know, the government can do, they will name names, like that governor is awful, he's a fascist, and he does this. Like they name names, they use powerful language, and it takes courage to do that, and we do get targeted and sometimes threatened with deportations. But if it's a corrupt government, I take that as a badge of honor. So. It's unashamedly emotional, again, because we're trying to just tell real stories and truth. And I feel like when we're surrounded by disinformation and untruths, that honesty, as hard or as dirty or whatever it can be, is the most sincere way you can show respect for somebody. And it's each of the Rollatos is its own little mini cosmos, we say. It's our own little mini diverse ecosystem, but we always connect it to the outside world, to our partners, to other communities, to its global value and place, and to build solidarity. So first, we'll go into the South African National Parks Rollato. And what was amazing about this, oh, it's going sorry. What was amazing about this is that they never disconnected environmental care and protecting the foundations of life with economic and individual empowerment and human dignity. So if they created jobs, it's because jobs are important for your dignity. You know, it's for yourself and your worth. And they would create jobs. So everything, conservation management through social upliftment. They never disconnected social upliftment from any environmental project. When women succeed, communities succeed. And this is, luckily they had a supportive government here, but they also had a lot of amazing women leaders because they understood, hey, you have a government that is trying to get more women involved in the workforce. Well, you can't do that if you don't provide daycares. They call them creches. So they would say, well, you want us there, but you don't provide creches, so what you're saying is empty words. You have to have an entire, or to feed our kids, or have them when they get out of school, have them, have someone there for them. So it was, you can't just say we want women involved. You have to think of everything involved that that entails. Touching the earth lightly was one of their building philosophies. So there's actually an entire body of work on this about the, I don't know, how can I say this in a nice way? To violently dig into the earth. There's very male traits associated with it. There's an entire feminist movement attached to this touching the earth lightly. Development is harsh and can be violent and can be oppressive. And so everything that they did, I'm sorry, this is on play for some reason. Everything that they did was to respect the earth as it stands. So here they would pack up sandbags, and that's what these women were doing. They were packing up sandbags to create the structures that would brace it instead of like putting them deep into the earth. So then the structures would actually build themselves. And again, it was creating jobs because these women were hand filling these sandbags. It was creating jobs, creating dignity. Ecological reconciliation. So this one is where they use environment to help heal past harms. Now in South Africa, of course, was, I'm going to pause it here so it doesn't move forward, was apartheid. And with apartheid, you had the white, powerful government, and then, historically speaking, you had what they had termed in their legal oppressive regime, you had blacks and you had colors. Now what the white government would do is they would pit the blacks against the colors. And they did this intentionally to keep them busy so that then they could continue their oppressive government regime. So this is the historic District 6, where they actually had the colored community bulldoze a black community. So it's things like that. So what they try to do with their conservation work is acknowledge the harms of history outright, honestly and truthfully, as hard as they are, and use that as a point to bring people together and have work. So that it was ecological reconciliation, using ecology, using history to try to heal harms. Care and respect for other species. They were always considerate of other species. So this right here was a little path for critters. It's kind of like we're seeing now more of those over highways, those animal passes, If this was that same idea, you'd see these little holes in the middle of their walls. And I was like, what is that for? And they're like, oh, that's for the snakes and the lizards. I was like, So it's just those little additional thoughts of the entire community around you. This was about, also again, creation of jobs is human dignity. It promotes integrity. So this man here, along this one coastal pathway was where the baboons would come, they were endangered species, would come down from the mountains and go and get abalone from the water. And every day around the same time in the morning they do that, and in the evening they'd all walk back up. And they would hire people to stop cars and stop traffic so that the baboons could safely cross. So it was job creation, and it's something that may seem silly to you for animal crossing, but again, it's the creation of a job for an environmental good that also creates a social, cultural good. And it's also about managing change, conservation. We're not trying to reach some stable perfect state, because that doesn't exist, but it's evolving as we evolve. The next was the Indiana Dunes Rollato, and we're all familiar probably with every single message that came out of this one. Power and politics is a daily obstacle. So what brought us together was this need for, like what Kim had said, this incredibly unique biodiversity of this area that is a model for the global community, the systems of diversity in this area. And when we say diversity, when we say biodiversity, that's humans included. Increased diversity is increased healthy system. That's scientific truth. So it's protecting these endangered species, these people, and these places. It was the importance of place, of knowing our place, and knowing our history, and what brought us to today. I was speaking to Jeff out in the hallway about the importance of the steel mills in this area. My grandfather was with the steel mills. My other grandfather was with the unions. And, you know, the industry brought good to this area. It took our country through 2 world wars, but then we've kind of been abandoned. This area has been abandoned by our state and by our nation. And possibly our global allies, you know, I mean, if you talk about our role in World War II. But here's a statement from Senator Douglas that I share at my meetings too, so it's very special to be here. When I was young, I wanted to save the world. In my middle years, I would have been content to save my country. Now I just want to save the dunes. Again, the importance of our sacred sands, but also our sacred workforce. And they don't have to be in opposition. They really don't. But, and we'll talk about this with one of the other Rollatos, environmental organizations in particular have a duty to their missions to protect the environment. We have to be consistently and more sensitive about who sits on our boards, how we live our mission, what money we take, because it means something. And when environmental groups don't stand up for the environment, it creates an apathy, a disillusionment. Like, oh, your polluters are on your board. Where do you get your grant money from? Or the idea of NGOs, too, that come in, use a community for some grant, and then disappear, or the community never sees the investment. I mean, those are real hard issues that we need to talk about. Promote an ecological literacy campaign. Nicole Messaker took these pictures. Dan, you're in the back. The importance of hands-on immersive education and play for children and adults. Foundational to our future. Know your place in the world. Water is life. This is the picture actually here when we had gone up the dune and went down the other side, and Mayada, our Jordanian colleague, was like, "You have waves of fresh water," and she went running down the sand dune. Like it was, you know, tears in the eyes. It was amazing. She was so happy and in awe, and we take it for granted, you know. We need to create spaces for ethical, spiritual, democratic dialogue. And there's Kim. We did just have Thanksgiving dinner. Then we went on to the Jordan Rollato. So in the idea we continue. So Cassandra had come with us to Brazil. And Daniel, actually, from the Indiana Dunes Rollato, had joined us for the Jordan Rollato. So it's about the continuity of these people. Sorry again about the slideshow. So this is actually a picture image of the Dead Sea. Islam, for them, is the basis for all of their action, for ethics and ecology. It underlies everything that they do. They use ethics as a common ground to bring people together, and we try to do the same. So we may come from diverse backgrounds with diverse interests and diverse priorities, but we can all understand ethics, like our values of what we care about or what guide our action. And so we found that as a way to really bring in some very diverse groups, public and private, to just use ethics as the reason for that space. In the spirit of Musala, we must be able to forgive and move forward without blame or guilt. Everything is created by measure and order, and everything is interdependent with everything else. So these are, you know, Islamic principles, but we understand them. That's sustainability, that's balance, that's interdependence. So So again, it translates across cultures. Water is the bloodline, water is life. That was everywhere in Jordan. As well as the loss of water is the loss of life, the loss of identity, the loss of culture. On the left is industrial development of the Dead Sea. It's dropping like 0.5 meters a year because of industrial development. On the right was the ancient village of Petra, where the foreign aggressors actually cut off their water lines in order to destroy the city. So and that still continues today. I mean, you see these threats to water and the importance of water, whether it's agriculture in California, loss of water, scarcity in Arizona. It's life. But what was interesting about Jordan is a lot of times you hear with resource scarcity is increased conflict. They flip that on their head. They said with increased scarcity is increased opportunity to come together. It's like instead of saying we're going to fight about these rare resources, they're like we're going to actually, it creates the need to come together. So they saw it as an opportunity for peace. Wise consumption. Here, this was one of the water levers because they have to give part of their fresh water to Israel. And so this was this highly technical way of sourcing that water out. Economic empowerment through eco-employment. Again, a lot of these were women-led. The school on the bottom right was one of the first schools that were integrated, boys and girls. And it was environmental education was the roots of it. Social responsibility. On the far left is actually, well, they're both princesses. There's a joke in Jordan, you throw a rock and you hit a princess. But it's very weird to come from Indiana and to hear people saying these things. So this was an actual wildlife refuge. And because of the trade of endangered species, when they would actually stop something at the border happening, they would take in these animals and then use them for therapy. I'm not sure, but for mental therapy for children and for adults. So they rehabilitate the animals and then also use the animals as an opportunity for human rehabilitation. Respect to all community of life. This is a Syrian bear on the left. Do not harm or cause harm to others. Generational knowledge sharing, wisdom of the adult, the hope of the youth, and the wisdom of the youth. We have rights of future generations. We have youth movements. We need to listen. We need to not talk and listen to them. And next is the real estate Rollato, where human dignity was a central ecological value. This is where we went to a town in Overförbergo that had just been hit by mudslides. And what had happened here was a product of climate change. It was a 1 in 500 year storm that was now happening 1 in 10 years, 1 in 5 years. So the water had such saturated the mountainside that there were big mountain slides. And it just completely destroyed the town. So their issue was we have ecology in extremes. No water, too much water. Nature is bounty and resource. Nature is harm. Our water is our richness, yet it's also what hurts us. You can see Cassandra at the bottom right. Everyone has a story. This is my home. This unifying story of harm. So nature always isn't a good for a lot of people. And that's something I had to learn in my work, because I was like, environment, community, nature hikes. But sometimes nature harms, and or it's used as a tool to harm. You know, these people can have this land. You cannot. We will protect this park with fine and fence and kick out indigenous peoples. Like, it's never really black and white. One issue that we did have here was they saw it as an act of God. So we had to be very sensitive to their religious perspective of this. I mean, it could have very well been an act of God, but there was also the data behind it that showed these storms were going to be more frequent, and they had to prepare for them. This is when we went to the world's largest landfill, Rollato in Rio de Janeiro. And it was difficult, and this is one of the problems with working with local communities in other countries. English is a very limiting language. It doesn't have half the emotion and way to convey as so many other languages out there. So part of it is lost in translation, so we just try to do the best we can. So the great challenge here is what to do with throwaways, and what they meant it is not just our consumption problems, because our environmental problems are the problems of the wealthy. It is not a problem of the poor. It is a problem of the wealthy. But these people were seen as throwaways as well. These people worked on the landfills and pulled out recyclables to sell them, to sell recyclables. So the government was seeing a benefit. The planet was seeing a benefit from these people, but they were rejected. They were mocked. They were throwaways. So what they did is they united. They unionized. They formed community groups and demanded government change, and they got it. They got safety standards. They had living arrangements changed. And they saw this, and this is this woman in the landfill doing this recyclables project. She's like, what we're doing here matters for the world. You know, like she had that perspective and that strength. And they don't want patronizing gifts from the government. This is what we're doing as our community. In fact, the government was not an ally to them for the most part. They had to demand. They had to unionize, and they called them collectives. The main goal was, so this was another one, it was a community recyclable project, women-led. Another project absolutely women-led. And it was raising the esteem in the women, because a lot of times domestic violence was a big issue here. They didn't have proper immigration, and so they would always be threatened with deportations. So the government would threaten them in their way of life and how to work in that environment, find a job, find meaning, find dignity. All right, speeding through again. So this was an internal shift at the family level, shifting behavior within homes that you do value, you do matter, and then, you know, finding strength in other women and neighbors and such. And starting their own projects and their own ideas. And they even, to bring in the community, they had these things called amigas de cazadores, which were friends of the cazadores, were the pickers, the recyclable pickers. And so this was just an outreach program. The amiga de cazadores were the friends. So those were the homes they'd go to collect recyclables. And it was like a parade when they'd go down the street. I mean, it was like a community event, you know, because everyone would come out, they'd talk, they'd have their drinks, and I mean, it was part of the community. Success for us is important to everyone. This was another one too where they had to create daycares for these women. They actually got lawyers as well involved to get the government off their backs with these threats they were making against these people. And part of that was unionizing, you know, to get the power together, the we. This is what she had said. My name was dirty because I couldn't pay my bills. I can now make my home better. So it's about dignity. I was afraid of not having knowledge because they use your lack of knowledge of the law, of the government, of your place in the community against you. And this group of women and workers rescued her life and her citizenship. Okay, it's Gongdong Village, Rollato. I just want to check time real quick because I don't want to. 1:30. It's pardon, what is it? 1:30. Okay, all right. Just a little bit more. So this is the Gongdong Village, Rollato, in Republic of Korea, so South Korea. It's a little island just south of mainland South Korea, and we worked with an indigenous village in Gongdong Village. So their threat was a military base, and it was a U.S. ROK military base. So it was built for the Republic of Korea for completely valid reasons. I mean, who are we to come in and say, do not fear North Korea? But it was on an indigenous community. It literally was on their sacred sites. This rock here is called Gurumbi, which is sacred to these people. And you can see to the left are some of those pylons, those concrete pylons of the military complex. And then in the far back is a UNESCO World Heritage Protected Site. So you had all of these things aligning, an indigenous community, a UNESCO site, and then you had the strength of a military development project with the most powerful country in the world, the U.S., because the U.S. would be using them for training as well. So our argument continually when we met with this community was environmental